Hello, Explorer. Tonight our pages flip to the Skinwalker, a shape-shifting evil shaman of the Native Americans, a tale of monster being driven back by community and shared traditions. I would love for you to like and subscribe, but only if you're glad for the perspective you're getting from us. Feel free to comment what you might already know about tonight's topic and how you learned it. Settle in and let's get to our Native American folklore story. The desert has a way of looking endless, especially when the night sky drapes itself across the land like a heavy blanket. A single hunter moves through that darkness, guided not by torchlight, but by the pale gleam of the moon. His moccasins barely scuff the sandy soil, trained to tread lightly, as though each footfall must ask permission from the earth itself. The air is dry and carries the faint bitterness of sagebrush mixed with the dusty sweetness of pinyon pine. Coyotes sing in the distance, their calls ragged and high, not quite laughter but not far from it either, and every so often the wind carries a sound that might be mistaken for an answer. He keeps his shoulders squared and eyes forward, because to linger on noises at night in this land is to invite your imagination to tear loose and run faster than your legs ever could. This hunter knows the land well, its dips and gullies, its dry washes where rabbits dart, and its sandstone ridges that glow pale in the moonlight like the bones of giants half buried. He also knows its silences, the kind that don't feel like peace but like a warning, as though the desert itself is holding its breath. Tonight feels like one of those silences. His bow is strung and ready, though he does not expect to use it. Most nights in this country the dangers are practical: a snake underfoot, or a jagged stone to slice through a thin leather sole. But there are other dangers in the dark, not the kind that may always be beaten with a bow and arrow, but they make a man feel safe to be holding one. He glances to the side, catching sight of his own shadow. It looks longer than it should, thin and stretched, and he knows the moon is likely playing tricks on him. So he shifts his step, testing whether the shadow follows faithfully. It does, but his mouth is dry nonetheless. Shadows are supposed to be loyal things, but on nights where they seem restless, this man remembers the old teachings, stories his grandmother told by firelight, of creatures who once were human, but gave themselves over to dark practices. Skinwalkers, beings who could borrow shapes, or step into the guise of coyote, or owl, or even the neighbor, and walk unseen until it was too late. It is said the Skinwalker steps are light but deliberate, as if they want you to half hear them, enough to feel hunted but never quite sure. The hunter reminds himself not to whistle at night. It's another teaching. Whistling in the darkness is an invitation, like propping open your door and waiting for something unwanted to step inside. He has no need to call the night towards him. It will come aplenty. As he moves farther from the village, the air cools sharply, and dry warmth falls into a desert chill. His breath leaves faint trails in the air, visible under the moonlight, curling like smoke from a dying fire. He crouches by a dry wash to scan for tracks. The soil here is loose but patterned, rabbit prints and the faint brush of a lizard's tail, and what looks like coyote pads. Yet the coyote prints are heavier than they should be, pressed deep into the earth, as if the animal were carrying a burden, or walking upright. He doesn't linger too long on that. Instead he spits into the sand, an old habit for breaking tension. His ears prick at a sound behind him. It's not the light chatter of small animals, but something broader, slower, a weight in the bush. He resists the urge to turn too quickly. Every hunter knows that prey startles at sudden movements, and predators are delighted by it. Instead he adjusts the strap of his bow as if that were all that concerned him. A smell drifts on the air. Not the musk of an animal, but something sharper and almost metallic, like blood on iron. He breathes shallow to keep from drawing too much of it in, and mutters a short phrase under his breath, words passed down that are meant to remind both the speaker and any listening spirits that he is not alone in this land. The moon hangs lower now, and its pale glow illuminates the rocks. He crosses a ridge where the stones are warm even in the cold night, storing the memory of the day's sun. This is where the desert feels most alive, humming with echoes that may have never belonged to any creature. Now some say the Skinwalker uses such places to stalk unseen, their shapes blending with shadow until they choose to be noticed. The hunter is aware of this, and he resists the urge to look too long into the darkness. If he convinces himself there is nothing there, perhaps there truly will be nothing. He kneels to brush his fingers through the sand. Now the grains are fine and cold and stick to his skin like powdered bone. The earth speaks softly here. It gives clues if one is listening. His fingertips sense faint impressions, the suggestion of a human heel overlapping with animal tracks. He straightens slowly, and the hair on the back of his neck stiffens, not from the cold or from the wind, but from the recognition that the land has told him things that he would rather not have known. Yet he carries on, because to turn back now would be to acknowledge the fear. He instead thinks of the village behind him, its fires burning low and their dogs curled by the doorways, his people asleep under woven blankets heavy with the smell of smoke and wool. He looks forward and steps into the endless stretch of land in front of him, and behind hears the faint echo of a footstep that does not belong to him. The night deepens, and the hunter senses it before he sees it. The tightening of the chest, that prickle across the shoulders that no cloak can warm. These are not tricks of the imagination, but his instincts, his body's alarm bells whispering that something is wrong. He halts on the ridge where the stones glint, and for a moment the desert seems to lean in. A movement flickers at the edge of his sight. At first it's easy to dismiss. A coyote perhaps trotting across. The desert is full of them after all. Yet when he shifts his gaze, the figure holds too still, frozen in a way no ordinary animal ever is. Its shape wavers with the shadows, as if the moonlight cannot decide quite how to shape it. The hunter lowers his eyes quickly, one of the first lessons drilled into them as children. Do not stare too long at what may not be natural. The sound comes next, a low rustle and then silence, and then another rustle, even closer. This isn't the busy chatter of the small life, but the deliberate placing of weight, as if something is stepping towards him. He forces himself to move, adjusting his pace to something casual, like he has noticed nothing at all. The air sharpens with the smell again, that metallic, sour smell. It rides the wind in bursts, one moment sharp, the next gone, replaced by the crisp scent of sagebrush. It makes the back of his tongue heavy. He grabs a pinch of ground sage from the pouch at his belt and rubs it between his fingers. The dust releases its smell, sharp and green. A small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. He presses on, but the landscape begins to play tricks on his mind. A boulder ahead seems to move slightly, but when he blinks, it's exactly where it first was. A crooked tree branch, bare of leaves, takes the shape of an outstretched arm for a moment. The hunter's heart is keeping steady, but his steps are lengthening. One more glance behind him could not be avoided. The shadows are thick, deeper than they should be under this bright of a moon, and for a moment he thinks he sees two small glints, like eyes catching the light. The people of his village have always spoken of mimicry. This is how the skinwalker plays with its prey. It copies the shape of beasts, borrows the gait of the neighbor. The hunter tells himself that what he sees is only the desert's trickery. Still, when the night breaks suddenly with a sound, like a whistle, sharp and cold, he stops. The whistle comes from the direction of the wash he left behind. He knows with certainty that no man from his village would whistle at night. His skin crawls, but he does not answer. The silence stretches. Then from the opposite side comes another sound, his own name, called low and soft, as if whispered by someone close. He grips his bow that much tighter. The voice is wrong. It carries his name, but not the warmth or cadence of a friend. It is said flat and hollow, as though repeated from memory. He does not turn towards it. He knows the rules. He cannot respond to this, no matter how it sounds. He remembers another detail, one of those things children laugh at until they are old enough to understand it isn't a joke. Skinwalkers are said to linger at the edges of gatherings, watching from dark brush. They do not strike immediately. They enjoy the chase. Tonight, he, the hunter, is the gathering, and he can feel himself fraying apart. A cloud drifts across the moon, and in that dimness the landscape shifts again. He catches sight of a figure walking upright across the ridge from him. It's a thin, elongated figure, moving with a jerky rhythm, like a puppet yanked along by invisible strings. He steadily lowers himself to the ground, belly pressed against the cold sand, and waits for the moon to return. When the moonlight does return, the ridge is empty. He now knows for sure that the tracks he noticed earlier were exactly what he feared. He rises slowly and adjusts the pouch at his belt. It carries small items within that mean things to him: sage and cornmeal, and a carved token gifted by his grandmother. Not weapons, but protections all the same. Another sound breaks the silence. The village dogs far in the distance begin to bark. Not the casual barking at rabbits, but a frantic chorus, and the hunter exhales. Dogs do not lie about what they sense. If they are warning, then the village already feels what he has just seen. The Skinwalker has announced itself. The hunter adjusts his bow and turns back towards home. He will return with his story to corroborate with them. The stories like this are for preparation. The people will need to hear of the sour smell, the 2 heavy tracks, and the whispers that spoke in his own name, to know for certain that the Skinwalker is here, and this is just the beginning of the visit. He reaches the village at a careful pace, letting his breath settle before stepping into the ring of homes, because the news he bears must arrive gently to avoid creating more panic. The dogs greet him first, rising from doorways to sniff at his pants and his moccasins and circle around him. He sees firelight sliding out of low doorways in thin orange strips, and smoke hanging under the roofs like a second layer, smelling of cedar, juniper, and the last gloss of fat from yesterday's stew. He passes a woman on a threshold, bundling a sleeping child tighter. She doesn't ask questions, but her eyes flick to the hills and then to his hands. He stops at the central hearth, where the coals pulse like a sleeping heart. Heat rolls off in paper-dry waves and snaps politely out of the twigs. One by one, people emerge. Elders whose faces hold whole maps of winters, weavers with wool clinging to their sleeves, and boys who still smell faintly of dust and milk. One by one, they come in and fill the space. He then kneels and tells it cleanly, everything he had seen and everything he had heard. He does not dramatize, but he makes it clear. Silence follows, but it's the disciplined sort of silence. An elder clears her throat and begins the reminders, not scolding, but steady. Doors are to be latched, shutters are to be barred. No one must whistle after dark, especially in these times. Do not answer a voice from the outside, and keep the fires modest. Everyone nods with the resigned acceptance of people who would prefer to ignore a storm and instead decide to stack the wood correctly. Homes shift into methodical motion. A pot of water goes on, not for soup, but for washing hands and faces. People say it rinses the feeling of dread from the skin. A grandfather walks the paths by tapping doorposts with a stick of fresh juniper. Smoke from little braziers curls upward as cedar and sage bloom back into rooms, clinging to wool and hair and the old beams overhead. A few families slip turquoise pendants over children's heads, a protection stone, cold against their fast heartbeats. Warnings move as whispers that are also instructions, passed with the speed of a good rumor and the care of a prayer. Sweep the floor and carry sweepings far from the threshold. Throw them into the dark wash, not the yard. Do not leave hair clippings where a bad hand can find them. If you must step out, turn a garment inside out so whatever watches will stumble over the seams. Cover mirrors and bowls of still water, because reflections make quick roads for things. The hunter moves between houses, answering questions with nods more than words. Aunties press bundles into his palm, dried sage tied with cotton string, or a pinch of cornmeal folded into cloth, small tokens. A boy points towards the ridge, and he kneels to nudge the hand down. You do not point at what you fear, because pointing draws a line that can connect the two. The boy tucks himself into his blanket and finds a more interesting subject somewhere near his own toes. Training accomplished. At his sister's doorway, the hunter finds practical methods underway. She seals baskets, ties lids, tucks away scraps, and wipes the sill with ash so the threshold reads as a clear boundary, visible and firm. Some families prefer ash, some lay a thin stripe of cornmeal. Either way, the message is the same. She places a small clay bowl near the door, a habit from their grandmother. Offerings like this are less about feeding spirits and more about a discipline to keep them sharp. From the far corral comes a brief rush of barking, and then a clean cut to silence. Nobody comments on it, but a different sound rises before they can think anything of it. A low, wordless hum threading from house to house. It is a steadying rhythm of the people that keeps them connected and keeps them calm. Near the hearth in the main tent, the elders sit as if in casual conversation. They inventory omens with the calm of people counting corn. Which families have been dreaming sharply? Which ravines are clinging to shadows too long and could be a place for the evil to gather? When the dogs last may have screamed like this? And who among the relatives is traveling and who is due home? They correct one another gently, because they must be precise for this. The hunter offers what he knows and leaves what would only invite panic out of it. They all agree on one thing. Mimicry from the Skinwalker means patience, and patience at the edge of a village is a test. Grandmothers open small pouches and touch ash to children's foreheads, a shadow of a mark, barely there. Ash smells like the inside of bread ovens and last night's talks. It is memories and connection. It dulls shine and reminds the body to be modest. It means protection against things like the Skinwalker that try to take you from your home. The herb keeper calls for fresh bundles at every doorway and windowsill. The hunter keeps moving and takes the long path by the corrals. Horses stand attentive with their ears forward, clearly not enjoying a night of rest. Their breath is smoking in small clouds. They're honest animals, generous with their curious alarm. The sheep are crowding a corner with the same mutual understanding as people pressed into a doorway before a storm. He listens to the dogs circulating. Short barks, each a note in a sensible map. He can tell they're communicating with each other. A thin cloud crosses the moon and drops a sparse sprinkle, just enough moisture to tack the dust and pull scent from the creosote. Doors open and close softly. He thinks of the voice that shaped his name wrong, and feels grateful for these simple practices. They ground him and makes him feel connected back to his people. By midnight, the village is glowing like a small constellation stitched into the dark. The coals at the center hold steady in each fire, watched in turn so they don't go out. The hunter rests on his heels and listens to his favorite kind of quiet. The domestic hush of tools being set down carefully, of babies grumbling in their sleep, of the steady crackle of firewood. Fear is present, but it's kept at bay by steady chores and steady motions. He stands when the elders lift their chins in agreement and start handing out assignments. Someone has to keep the ridge in sight. Someone has to walk the sheep. Someone has to tend the coals of each fire. Someone will keep that low hum in the village moving. And at first light, when the ground remembers what crossed it, the trackers will read the dirt like a long letter from an impolite relative and decide on an answer. The wind drops until the quiet sounds loud. The hunter can hear cedar rasp, the slow breath of the horses, and the faint clatter of a bead when a child rolls deeper into a blanket. The village holds itself steady, and he settles near the coals, his palms cupped to the heat. The fire in the center of the village is no longer the sleepy pile of coals that marked the hunter's return. Now it has been coaxed into a low, steady flame. Around the fire, people gather not for conversation, but for rhythm. A song begins, not loud, not even melodic in a way an outsider would recognize. It is steady, almost like breathing set to a beat, a pattern meant more for endurance than performance. The notes hover in the dry night air, floating above the crackle of wood. Children lean against their mothers' laps, eyes heavy, lulled by the repetition. The hunters sit in a loose ring, keeping their ears turned outwards even as their voices join in. The women tend to bundles of herbs, passing them from hand to hand so that each person can brush the smoke across their chest and head. Sage smolders with a pungent bitterness that sticks to the hair and stings the eyes lightly, but people welcome that sting. Cedar follows, resinous and grounding, a scent that seems to thicken the air into something harder to cut through. A grandmother produces a few strands of sweetgrass saved for this kind of night, plaited carefully and fragrant when smoked. Sweetgrass is said to attract good spirits, a reminder that not all visitors come with ill intent, and its sweetness balances the sharper herbs like a gentle voice. The hunter sits across from the fire, smoke blurring his features as though the night itself has been persuaded to forget him for a while. He feels the herbs do what they have always done, shape his fear into something smaller and manageable. Beside him, a boy leans close to his father and whispers a question. The father answers without breaking the rhythm of the song. The song is not just for comfort, and neither is the smoke. It is a shield to say that their space is spoken for. Prayers follow, each person giving voice to their own in soft murmurs. Some are short, just names of ancestors spoken under breath. Others are longer, asking for guidance from the earth, the sky, and fire itself. The prayers blend together until they are undistinguishable, a hum of words that seems to melt into the night, swallowed by stars that prick sharp. Prayer in this moment feels less like a request and more like reminding themselves that they are not the first to endure nights stalked by things. The hunter notices the dogs lying near the edge of the light. They do not sleep, and instead their ears twitch and their noses test the wind. Occasionally one gives a low growl, a reminder to all that the perimeter is still guarded. Within the circle of smoke and flame, the atmosphere carries a strange mix of tension and comfort. The tension because everyone knows the creature lingering beyond sight. The comfort because everyone knows the protections are older than that fear. A young girl, not old enough to understand fully, but old enough to imitate, takes a pinch of ash from the fire and draws a line across her own brow, grinning when her mother nods. A cousin whispers that the skinwalker will never want to tangle with such a fierce warrior, and the girl hides her smile behind her hands. At the edge of the gathering, an elder steps forward with a small pouch. She sprinkles cornmeal into the flames, each pinch making the fire crackle sharply. The offering is not extravagant, but the sound is clear. The hunter feels the truth of this in the way the flames seem to steady, their tips leaning back towards the circle rather than outward towards the night. Through it all, the desert remains silent. The wind shifts and carries faint sounds, a scrape of stone, the echo of a cry that might be coyote or might be human. No one reacts outwardly. To call attention is to lend energy, and tonight they starve the visitor not just with silence, but with their discipline. The song continues, measured and unbroken, like footsteps pacing a long journey. The smoke thickens, clinging to hair and blankets, until the entire circle smells of earth, resin, and the faint sweetness of grass. As the hours pass, the people do what they have always done, in the face of the uncanny. They blend their practicality with spirituality. Blankets are drawn tighter, food is passed, simple roasted kernels and dried meat to keep hands busy and bellies warm. Someone stirs a pot of thin stew over a smaller fire, but the smell of marrow and herbs mingles with the smoke nonetheless. And feeding the body is as much a defense as feeding the spirit. The hunter accepts a piece of roasted maize, its kernels charred and smoky, and finds in its simple crunch the reassurance that life continues even when shadows loom. He looks beyond the circle once, towards the ridge where he had seen the figure earlier. The darkness there still seems thicker, but the fire does not falter, the song does not break, and the people do not scatter. Their preparations are about endurance. By the time the fire sinks low again, the smoke has woven itself into every cloak and braid, and the prayers hang faintly in the cold air like a residue. The skinwalker may be lingering and even stalking around their village, but its presence feels thinner, as though the circle of protection has thickened the barrier between them. The hunter pulls his blanket tighter, the smell of sage heavy in the fibers, and leans back against the ground. His eyes close not in surrender, but in trust that the fire and the song will keep their vigil even while he drifts to sleep. Morning comes reluctantly to the desert, not with a burst of color, but with a slow bleaching of shadows, as though the world has been rinsed. The horizon glows in muted peach, and the night's chill still clings to the ground, stiffening fingers and biting at noses. Smoke lingers from the protective fires, sharp in the air and woven into hair and blankets. The children wake up groggy, and the dogs stretch stiffly. and the whole village exhales, relieved that the night has not claimed their lives. But relief is never full until the land has been checked. The trackers rise first, men and women both, chosen not for strength but for agility and their ability to read the ground. They move quietly, carrying little more than knives, water, and a few pouches of cornmeal. The hunter from the night before joins them, his face still shadowed with the memory of that wrong-smelling wind and his borrowed voice. The group steps beyond the circle of homes into the pale openness of the desert, where dew clings faintly to sparse grasses, and the sand shows every scar of what passed during the night. It doesn't take long. The first tracks appear in a wash where the soil is damp and soft. At first glance, just coyote prints, the usual, but as the trackers crouch low, their faces harden. The depth is wrong. It matches what the hunter had seen the night before. One tracker brushes the sand lightly with his fingertips and pulls his hand back with a sharp breath. The print seems to shift slightly under the morning light, as if refusing to be fixed into a single shape. Further along the ridge, they find scratches on stone, not the casual scrape of claws, but marks carved as though to be seen. 3 lines, jagged and running parallel. One tracker shakes her head. It's a clear message. Skinwalkers are said to enjoy leaving puzzles, signs that mock those who follow. To find marks is less discovery than acknowledgement. They know you are watching. The smell returns, faint, but even there in daylight. It clings to a patch of brush. A bird lies nearby, its body untouched, but its feathers scattered in a neat circle. A warning or a taunt, nobody is sure, but everyone recognizes how unnatural it looks. Coyotes eat. Owls eat. Only something human would leave prey uneaten and then dressed up for effect. They press onwards and soon come to a stretch of prints that grow stranger still. Human toes, bare, pressed into sand, but overlapping with paw marks. Some are backward, as if whatever made them wanted to confuse the reader of the tracks, or perhaps mock the very act of walking. Children playing might make such patterns, giggling as they jumble prints or step back and forth or turn around, but this is miles from the village. One tracker bends low and places his palm flat to the ground. He closes his eyes and the desert gives him an answer in temperature. A chill here, heavier of a cold than the sun should allow at this hour. The others nod when he pulls his hand back, muttering that the creature must have rested in this spot. They do not speak it aloud, but the knowledge presses on them all. If it rested here, it definitely watched them. The group circles back towards the village, their findings heavy on their shoulders. They sprinkle cornmeal at intervals as they walk, a habit meant to confuse or distract spirits. Thin lines of white dust trail behind, stark against the brown earth. A crow caws harshly above, breaking the silence, and one of the younger hunters murmurs that even the birds sound different on such mornings. When they return, the people are already gathered, waiting. The hunters report everything they saw carefully, and the elders listen with stern patience. It doesn't surprise them. What unsettles the young is, to the old, simply confirmation. Still, there is a shift in the air. Preparations last night were for a presence that might pass by in hopes that they could deter it. Now that the village knows it lingers, means that it plans to stay. Women gather ash and spread it at thresholds again, this time thicker. Children are kept inside, pressed into chores like grinding maize or twisting cord, so their attention doesn't wander to the edges of the village. Men fetch more wood, but not for large fires, just steady ones that will keep them lit throughout the night. The healer lays out herbs, checking each bundle with care, replacing anything dry and brittle. She reminds everyone that protections are only as strong as their maintenance. The hunter sits apart for a moment, sharpening his knife, not because he expects steel to matter against a skinwalker, but because the rhythm of stone against blade steadies his mind. He thinks of the prints backwards in the sand, and everything else he has heard and seen. He knows the game is far from over for the creature. By mid-morning, the sun is bright and hot, washing away the last chill, but the feeling in the village does not warm. If anything, the brightness feels fragile, as though the light is too thin to chase away what lingers in the shadows of the stones. The people move with purpose, because they understand what the tracks mean. The night to come will not be a quiet test of nerves. It will be a game that demands more than smoke and song. The second night arrives with less hesitation than the first, as though the sun has grown tired of standing guard and slips quickly behind the ridges. The desert cools with unnerving speed, warmth vanishing from stones and sand until the air feels brittle. People move briskly through the village, their motions sharp with memory of the tracks and the staged feathers found at dawn. The hunter waits near the central fire with his bow across his knees, the leather grip warm from his tight grip. He watches the smoke drift upwards in pale ribbons, each strand tugged into different shapes by the wind. The song begins again, low, not so much sung as sustained. But tonight the sound does not feel fully contained. At the edges of hearing, something else seems to echo it, faint and mocking. It's as if the song has grown a shadow, and the people exchange glances, though none dare break the rhythm. The dogs go first. Untethered now, their hackles stiffen and their teeth flash in the dim. Their barks slice the night in jagged bursts, each directed towards a different corner. One charges and stops short, growling at nothing visible. Then another swings wide, tail stiff and circling. Soon they are all pacing and warning, herding an unseen pressure that presses closer. A child whimpers but is quickly hushed, but the sound is already echoed from the ridge, a perfect imitation, sharp enough to twist every stomach in the firelight. From beyond the corral a voice calls, "Let me in." It is an old man's voice, rough and strained, and a few heads snap up in recognition, but the old man it copies is sitting by the fire, silent, with his hands folded. The voice repeats, louder this time and carrying the cadence of impatience. The hunter's jaw clenches. The elders murmur reminders. Do not respond, because it will invite. Still, the tension makes the air heavy. It is unnatural to ignore the sound of kin calling for aid. The dogs surge suddenly towards the far slope, their barking frantic. A shape flickers into view, caught in moonlight. A coyote, loping with jerky rhythm. But even at a distance it looks wrong. Its legs are too long, its body stretched unnaturally thin, its head snapping side to side as if unsure as to what shape to take. The hunters raise bows but hold. Arrows are tools for deer and rabbit, not for something that changes its form every second. The figure halts just beyond the ring of smoke and stares, its eyes pale and glinting. Then it drops low, and when it rises again, it is not coyote, but man, thin and angular, standing crooked, as though remembering how upright posture is supposed to look. A gasp moves through the gathering, but the elders hush sharply. Yet the Skinwalker is bold enough already. It steps just close enough that the smoke curls against its chest, then reels back with a hiss not quite animal and not quite human. Its shape is wavering constantly, and a laugh bursts out, harsh and wrong, bouncing from rock to rock so no one can say quite where it began. The hunter feels his heart pounding, but his hands stay steady. He sprinkles cornmeal into the fire, each pinch a boundary written with sparks. The flames hiss and flare briefly, then settle. The creature paces outside the circle, just beyond the reach of smoke, testing for weakness. Then the mimicry begins in earnest. The hunter's name again, this time spoken perfectly, warm and familiar, like his sister might call him across the yard. A child's cry follows, pleading, then laughter, his own thrown back at him from the dark. Each voice is bait, designed to pull someone from the circle. But the people have rehearsed this and know what to do. They keep their eyes down and their prayers steady. The wind shifts, carrying the sour metal stench across the fire. It makes stomachs lurch, but it also clarifies something. The Skinwalker is close enough now to reek, close enough that its body cannot help but betray itself. The dogs snarl, but they do not attack. They know better than to cross that line. The hunters prepare quietly, sliding hands over weapons not for a clean kill, but for the comfort of readiness to keep them calm. Knives are rubbed with ash and arrows are dusted with sage. Some whisper that skinwalkers cannot die by ordinary means, only weakened and resisted, but even resistance matters when the children are nearby. A sudden shriek shatters the night, a sound that scalds the ears. The shape lunges forward, but the fire surges as if in defiance, throwing sparks that burst upward like startled birds. The creature recoils, its shadow stretched impossibly tall. For a moment the air itself feels bruised and heavy. The people do not scream, they just hold their song steady, keep their rhythm unbroken. The hunter catches its eyes once, just once, and sees nothing but hollowness, like a cavity that wears eyes as if they are clothes. It's enough to chill him to the bone, but also enough to strike him awake and remind him, this thing is not invincible. It recoiled at the fire, it hissed at their smoke, it lingered instead of striking. That means fear flows both ways. The confrontation does not end in a clash of blades or blood. It ends in stalemate, the skinwalker pacing, hissing, mimicking while the people refuse to crack. Eventually, with a final ragged laugh, it retreats into shadow, its form flickering. But nobody relaxes. Everybody knows that retreat is not defeat. The people keep watch until dawn, their voices hoarse from hours of singing. They've met it directly now and seen its tricks up close and have heard their own voices thrown back at them. And though their bodies ache with fatigue, their spirits know something. The skinwalker pressed and they did not break, meaning it can be beaten. Morning's pale light looks cleaner than it feels. Everyone is tired, but the village moves with the steady purpose of people who would rather scrub the floor twice than trip once. The creature has taken their attention for 2 nights. Today the people will make it starve. The hunter rinses his hands and touches a pinch of salt to his tongue to chase away the sour metal scent. Dogs circle with tails level, horses stamp and settle, and a grandmother throws sweepings beyond her door. The healer, a stern and practical woman, sets down what speaks for protection. Fresh sage, cedar pitch, sweet grass, cornmeal, turquoise pendants, and a bowl of old ash. Her rules are simple. No one answers voices from outside. No whistles, mirrors stay covered. Everything they've been doing repeated and returned to the mind over and over again. The plan is refusal, not a trap. If the creature wants a stage, the village will offer none. If it prefers the edges, the village will move its edges inwards. They will shrink the room until this creature is unable to find a space for itself. They start with a boundary layered until it feels like habit. Ash at thresholds, cornmeal in thin lines, juniper tapped along posts. Near the central fire they mark a circle wide enough to sit, pass bowls, and nap against each other's shoulders when they need to rest. At midday the trackers visit the ridge to converse with the land and find what it has to tell them. They bring their calm instead of their bows. The ground offers its diary, heel to paw steps, backwards prints, the same things they'd learned the day before. A ring of stones and a pinch of cornmeal mark a path by invitation only. Back in the village, the healer asks for quiet, lets small sounds be useful. She hums a tune for stamina and invites others to carry it while they work. She passes a bowl of ash with which brows and chest are darkened. Over hair she smooths cedar. The resin steadies the mind like a hand on a pot. Food comes early. Stew with beans and squash, meat smoked to toughness that softens only when patient teeth insist, and bread blistered and tender. At sunset the circle fills. No high dancing or sharp drumming, just people sitting close enough that elbows touch elbows and breaths find the same pace. Dogs take post at the corners, and the hunter rests against a post he trusts. Dusk cools to night, and the first test arrives gently. A voice at the corral calls a horse by name, with the exact affection the boy who tends it would use. The elder beside him nudges a bowl closer. The voice tries again, and no one answers. The dogs stand and stare into the dark, then sit again after a few minutes. A second test crawls along the ground, a whimper at the circle's edge, human enough to tug a mother forward, wrong enough that they stop themselves. She grips her child's blanket and hums deeper. Then the laughter arrives, first the hunter's own, perfect in rhythm. It clicks against the post and tossed into the circle like a pebble. The hunter does not turn and instead feeds the fire 3 pinches of cornmeal and returns to checking his knife. The mimicry then borrows the grandmother's throat, the aunt's cough, the rustle of the healer's bracelets. The village offers nothing in return. The shape unfolds into the light. It's taller tonight, and its shoulders are bent at an angle that insults the idea of joints. It keeps a precise distance from the smoke, testing with a hand that looks human except that its fingers are changing length the entire time. It uses the old man's voice to ask for water. The old man lifts his cup and drinks without saying anything. The healer stands like someone checking a pot. She steps to the smoke's edge and flicks ash outwards. Her hum does not pause. She says one line, flat and uninterested. We keep what is ours. She does not stare and she does not bargain beyond that. The creature rummages for a hook. It borrows the hunter's sister again, then the child's new friend, then the traveler due tomorrow. It sways, confused that no thread is catching. The dogs step forward, patient and not attacking, but occupying space and pushing backwards. The hunter rubs a turquoise pendant between his thumb and forefinger and lets the signs from dawn drain out of his mind. The elders begin a prayer too quiet to quote out loud, and the healer feeds a sliver of cedar to the coals. The smoke spikes and the shape flinches in response, making a smaller truth much larger. It can be forced to leave. The creature is lingering, but then thins and pairs itself to two glints and a smear of darkness. A last imitation tempts a young man with a cousin's apology he has wanted for years. But he smiles, keeps eating, and decides he can survive another night without closure. When the beast finally withdraws, it feels less like vanishing and more like it got bored. The night loosens and the circle hums because stopping too soon is how they slip back into the issue. Only when the dogs fold to their bellies and sigh does the healer nod. A woman wipes ash from her brow and smudges it into her palm. The hold is not snapped with the spectacle of big conflict. It has been thinned by their constant effort. The people are exhausted, but still themselves. The hunter stretches his legs and feels the desert's attention wander off to look for easier sport down some unwatched arroyo. Tomorrow will be for repairs, to sleep, to sweep, and to thank the dogs and the elders. Tonight they keep tidy and maintain their rhythms until they know that the sun is back in the sky. Dawn arrives without ceremony, soft and pale, as though the desert itself is weary from the night's effort. The cold lifts more slowly this morning, reluctant to release its hold, but the village stirs in their unhurried motions. They have done their work, and now they rest like warriors. The hunter wakes stiff, shoulders sore from keeping his bow at hand, though he hardly remembers drawing it. He stretches with his joints popping like dry wood and walks to the central fire. He sprinkles a final pinch of cornmeal onto them, not in protection, but in gratitude. One by one the people emerge from their homes. No one celebrates, but there is relief visible in their movements. The hunter walks and then lingers by the corral, rubbing his horse's neck, the animal's warmth seeping into his cold hands. He reflects and knows that these lessons will outlive generations. It will pass to children in whispers, then to grandchildren in stern reminders, on and on. Every generation will polish this story and keep it alive. By midday, laughter returns, hesitant at first but then freer, like a stream resuming flow after the ice of winter breaks. A woman jokes, children play in the dust, and the hunter sits near the fire, closes his eyes briefly, and listens. Thank you to our dear listeners for your resilience against the tempting calls in the desert night. Our next story will cover the healing practices and good magic of native tribes, similar to the Navajo or Sioux. The day begins long before the sun climbs above the horizon. The desert is still holding the night's chilly air close to the ground, and the prairie grasses glimmer with dew like tiny beads. A healer steps out from her home, wrapped in a thick robe that smells faintly of cedar smoke, and sets about coaxing the morning into balance. She carries a small clay bowl, simple and practical, with a few coals nestled in its belly. Onto these she places dried sage, a twist of cedar, and a braid of sweetgrass, the smoke curling upward in lazy ribbons. The air changes almost instantly. The sharp bitterness of sage, the resinous punch of cedar, and the sweet hay-like fragrance of grass mingle together and hang over the village like a protective shawl. Children wrinkle their noses, but they breathe it in anyway. The smell is their sign of safety. The healer moves slowly, not because she is old, but because each gesture has weight. She waves the smoke around doorways, letting it cling to lintels, sweep under thresholds, and curl against the low eaves. Dogs shake their coats and sneeze dramatically, adding their own commentary to the ritual. The smoke doesn't just smell pleasant, it carries intention. Sage is for cleansing, cedar is for strength, and sweetgrass is for calling good spirits. Together they remind the land and its people that the day starts with not just labor or food, but with balance. Inside one of the homes, a man coughs, his chest rattling like a loose drum. The healer steps through the doorway, her bowl leaving a trail of fragrant haze. She waves the smoke over him, murmuring soft words that sound like a cross between prayer and a story. He sits, letting the smoke roll into his lungs, coughing again but smiling faintly, as if the taste of herbs is already shifting something inside him. His wife ladles him water thick with willow bark, bitter enough to twist his lips, but the bitterness is medicine. Bark from trees standing near streams, taken because water carries healing, and trees that drink deeply lend some of that health to their bark. The healer listens as much as she acts. She notes the man's eyes, the color of his lips, the way his breathing catches. Her hands rest lightly on his ribs, not pressing, just learning. The work of a healer is as much observation as it is ritual. Smoke does its work on the unseen, but eyes and ears do the work on what is plainly there. She straightens, nods, and tells the wife to brew more willow, stronger this time, and to heat stones for the man to hold, so warmth can ease what smoke and bark cannot. When she steps back into the dawn, the world is beginning to brighten. The eastern sky burns with faint orange clouds, warm like the embers of a fire. She hums softly, letting her tone rise and fall with a cadence that seems to weave into the birdsong. Healing songs are not always grand chants. Sometimes they're little murmurs, sung while walking paths, collecting firewood, or feeding animals. Their power lies not in spectacle, but in consistency, the way a mother's lullaby comforts, not because of the words or the rise, but because it's always there when it's needed. Elsewhere in the village, the smell of breakfast wafts through the air. Corn cakes pressed against hot stones, broth bubbling faintly with deer meat and wild onions. Even these are part of the healer's world, because food is medicine long before herbs or chants. Children run past with their fingers sticky, with bits of bread all over, while elders watch with dry humor. One remarks that the healer's smoke seems to make even their stubborn grandchildren behave. The healer snorts and waves her hand. The healer pauses near the edge of the village, where the land stretches wide and empty. She places a pinch of cornmeal on the ground, a small but deliberate gesture. It is an offering not to illness but to balance, a reminder that healing happens not only in the lungs or the bones, but in the relationship between people and the land. She whispers words and lets the desert carry them off. A breeze stirs, carrying the smell of smoke outward into the open country. Beyond the village, the prairie smells of damp grass, while the desert holds its dry mineral tang. The healer breathes in both and feels her body settle. Healing is not a matter of choosing between the physical and spiritual. It is always both. She laughs quietly to herself, amused at how stubborn illnesses can be, like guests who won't leave after dinner, and how much patience a healer must carry. By the time the sun edges over the horizon, the healer has completed her morning round. The smoke lingers faintly on every surface, clinging to hair, blankets, even the dog's fur. The song she hummed blends into the rhythm of daily chores, the scrape of grinding stones, the thump of wood being set into place, and the soft mutter of conversation. The healer sits again finally, bowl empty but robe scented heavily, and lets herself feel the warmth of the new sun on her face. Healing, after all, begins here too, with the act of enjoying the rays and reminding the body that it belongs to the world. The healer's day rarely stays within the walls of smoke and song. Soon enough, she's called to where her hands are needed directly. In the shade of a cottonwood tree, a young man sits stiffly, his jaw clenched against pain. He fell from a horse the day before, an ill-timed tumble that ended with his shoulder striking the packed earth hard enough to make the whole corral wince. Now he sits cradling his arm, the joint swollen and stubbornly out of place. His mother hovers nearby with a bowl of cool water while the healer kneels and examines the injury. Her hands are thin and lined with age, but they know the language of bones. She traces the line of the collarbone, the slope of the shoulder, and the dip where the joint should rest but doesn't. She clicks her tongue softly. Bone setting is not just physical work. It's persuasion, coaxing stubborn pieces of the body back to where they belong. She murmurs to the young man, words that are half comfort and half distraction, and places her hand on his arm. The muscles twitch, resistant like a horse unwilling to walk into water. Nearby, an apprentice prepares herbs crushed into a paste, yarrow leaves ground with a stone, their smell sharp and green, mixed with a bit of bear grease to hold it together. This will be smeared over the swollen skin after the bone is convinced to return. The healer nods approval but does not rush. First she steadies herself, pressing her feet firmly against the earth, then guides the arm gently. There is resistance, then a pop, and the joint slips back where it belongs. The young man hisses through his teeth, then exhales so long and hard it seems as if his lungs have been holding that breath for days. His mother clutches her chest in relief, whispering thanks. The paste is applied with slow strokes, the coolness of the yarrow sinking into hot, angry skin. Strips of soft hide are wrapped around the shoulder to hold it steady, their texture rough but dependable. The healer presses her palm to his forehead briefly, not for fever checking but for reassurance. Touch is medicine too. She tells him to rest, to avoid showing off his writing for at least a few days, and the young man manages a sheepish grin despite his pain. The mother presses food into the healer's hand, a small cake of cornmeal, as payment, a gesture more symbolic than transactional. Healing is a big part of the community. Everyone knows the depth is already shared. Elsewhere, another task awaits. A child has awoken with stomach pain, curled in a tight ball on a blanket, whimpering quietly. The healer kneels, her knees creaking in a way that makes her sigh, and rests her ear lightly against the child's belly. She listens, not just for gurgles or tightness, but for the rhythm of the body, whether it sounds sluggish or restless. She nods after a while and requests a tea brewed from wild mint gathered near a stream, its leaves cooling and aromatic, good for calming unruly insides. The child sips reluctantly, the bitterness softened by honey. Within minutes, his shoulders relax and his cries soften. Hands move from bones to bellies to heads without hesitation. Another elder complains of headaches that leave his vision blurry. The healer presses her thumbs gently at his temples, then runs her fingers along the base of his skull, feeling for knots that seem tight. She works with patience, pressing and kneading until the man's face loosens, his eyelids lowering. She hums softly while she works, steady enough to give the man's mind something to follow. Touch and song together become a kind of anchor. The healer knows these practices are not separate from the sacred. The body is a map that needs to be balanced. Illness is where the map folds awkwardly or tears. Hands, herbs, and words are threads to smooth and stitch. Sometimes the work feels ordinary, resetting a shoulder, rubbing mint oil into a child's chest, pressing sore muscles, but always beneath it runs the knowledge that the body is more than flesh. These are signs that are as much as symptoms. To tend to them is to speak to the body and the spirit at once. She moves from person to person, as though following an invisible string, always pausing long enough to let her presence do a part of the work. And her hands carry memories with them. When she presses against an elder's back, she recalls her own mother doing the same, whispering words of encouragement while rubbing warm bear grease into a bruised rib. Healing is like an inheritance to her, passed through each generation, about learning the contours of bones and the textures of pain. By afternoon, her robe smells not only of cedar smoke, but also of yarrow, mint, grease, and sweat. She rests briefly, sipping water flavored faintly with juniper, and watches the village pulse with activity. Children chase dogs, men repair tools, and women grind corn. The air is humming with life, and within it she feels the subtle undercurrent of balance restored. The young man with the mended shoulder laughs with his friends. The child with the quiet stomach naps, sprawled under a blanket. The elder with the headache sits upright, muttering complaints about his vision but clearly less burdened. These are the small victories of the hands, not miracles but continuations, the body reminded of its natural design. As the sun tilts west, the healer flexes her own fingers, stiff and aching from their work. She chuckles at herself, half amused and half weary. Who heals the healer's hands, she wonders, and answers her own question by rubbing them briskly together until the ache feels like warmth instead of pain. Tomorrow there will be more joints, more bellies, more heads. Tonight she will sit by the fire, her hands smelling of herbs and grease, her body tired but her spirit ready. The next day the air grows hotter as the sun climbs high, and with it comes the call to gather what the land offers for healing. The healer ties her hair back with a strip of leather and steps onto the open prairie, her pouch slung across her shoulder, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. She does not walk randomly. Each turn of her foot seems guided by memory, by landmarks that are not marked at all on a piece of paper. Medicine is not hidden, but it is particular, and one must know when and where the plants reveal themselves. She begins with sage, its small gray leaves tough against the wind. Kneeling, she presses her nose close, inhaling its sharp, resinous smell. She pinches sprigs gently, never stripping the plant bare. A pinch of cornmeal is scattered on the soil when she's done, pale against the earth. It's a sign of payment. Sage will dry well, burn easily, and its smoke will guard doorways and lungs alike. Further along, a patch of sweetgrass waves gently in a low hollow, where water lingers after rain. Its blades are long, green with a sheen that almost glitters when the light catches. She gathers a few strands, weaving them into simple braid even as she cuts them, because sweetgrass is always braided, always tied, a reminder of connection. The braid smells faintly sweet and fresh, almost like vanilla, and she tucks it into her pouch carefully. The prairie gives willow by the water's edge, its bark bitter when chewed, the taste puckering lips but easing pain. She shaves a few strips, the scent sharp and clean. She remembers her own teacher telling her how willow bends but does not break, and its medicine teaches the same, to ease what resists too stiffly, to soften aches so that the body remembers flexibility. She pauses to watch the reflection of the sky in the slow water, dragonflies skimming the surface, and dips her fingers in, murmuring a short thanks. Crossing into drier ground, she finds cedar, short, twisted trees with a resinous scent clinging even to the bark. A few sprigs break easily, releasing sticky sap that clings to her fingers. She rubs it between her thumb and forefinger until the sharp smell bursts further into the air, filling her nose with its strength. Cedar smoke is strong medicine, very stern, like a hand on the shoulder that reminds you to straighten up. She carries only a little. Cedar should be asked for sparingly. Its strength must be saved. Now, not all medicine is found easily. She crouches near a rocky slope and scans carefully for the small, unassuming leaves of echinacea, its flowers long since dried, but its roots still potent. With a stick she digs gently, exposing the earth's gift. The root smells earthy and almost peppery, and she scrapes it clean before wrapping it in a piece of cloth. It will be boiled later to be able to chase sickness from the blood. The healer chuckles softly when she passes a patch of prickly pear cactus, its pads fat and thorny, dotted with red fruit. Children love to eat the fruit when carefully peeled. It's sweet and sticky, but she sees the pads themselves as medicine too. Split open, they can cool burns or soothe fevers. She slices one carefully, the mucilage oozing thick and slick, sticky against her hands, like handling frog skin. It's unpleasant, but useful, and she sets it aside in her pouch despite its mess. By midday, the healer's pouch is full and fragrant, a library of scents mixing, sharp sage, sweet grass, sticky cedar, earthy root, and cactus slime that clings to everything. She returns toward the village slowly, stopping once to press her palm against the ground. The soil is hot now, almost burning, but beneath it she feels the hum of life, steady as ever. Back at the village, children crowd curiously, sniffing at the pouch and wrinkling their noses. She lets them touch the braid of sweetgrass, their fingers tracing the woven strands, then shoos them away before they spill her hard work into the dust. She sets to work hanging herbs to dry on low racks, the smoke of the fire curling around them to keep insects at bay. Leaves crisp quickly in the dry air, their scent intensifying as the water leaves them. Later, when the air cools, she will grind roots with stone, crush leaves into powder, and mix pastes with animal fats. For now she sits with her pouch finally empty, her robe streaked with green stains and cedar resin, and feels the satisfaction of her harvest. Medicine is a quiet gathering with patience, the same patience as collecting firewood or water, but it carries the power to shift sickness and guard a village. The healer wipes her sticky hands on a scrap of cloth, laughing at the mess Prickly Pear always makes, and leans back against a post. Around her the herbs sway gently in the breeze, their scents mingling with wood smoke and the savory smell of stew simmering nearby. It is a catalogue of survival, written not in books, but in leaves, roots, and resin. The sun dips low and paints the dusky horizon a fiery orange. Inside a lodge, the healer arranges her tools carefully. Pouches of colored sands, small jars of herbs, a bunch of feathers, and a gourd that rattles when shaken. Tonight is not about mending a shoulder or easing a fever. Tonight is about dealing with a sickness deep within the body and the spirit. For the people, illness is rarely just a matter of muscle or blood. A young woman lies on blankets in the center, her face pale and her breath shallow. She's been unwell for days, and food tastes bitter to her. Sleep slips through her fingers, and her body feels heavy as though weighted by stones. Her family sits nearby, their eyes tired but hopeful. The healer settles herself, spreads her hands into her pouches, and cups various sands, and she begins to pour. The colored grains trickle through her fingers, forming deliberate shapes across the packed earth floor. The sand painting is not a decoration. Each line and curve opens up symbols, a circle symbolizing the world in balance. Around it stretches lines like paths, some straight and some crossing. These are guiding spirits. Shapes of holy beings emerge, stylized and geometric. Yellow sand glows like dawn, black sand like night, red like the earth, and white like the bones of ancestors. As the painting grows, the air itself feels heavier, as though the room is thick with presence. The family watches in silence. Children fight the urge to fidget, their wide eyes fixed on the growing image. The healer murmurs as she works, words slipping between chant and breath. She lays feathers across the design, then shakes the rattle softly. The sound is steady and hypnotic, a rhythm that encourages listening. When the painting is complete, the young woman is guided to sit within it. Her feet rest in the circle, her hands on her lap. The healer smudges her with sage, trailing the smoke up her arms, across her chest, and over her head, then motions the family to join in her song. The voices rise, not polished but strong, weaving together like threads pulled across a loom. The healer chants louder now, and leans close to the young woman, brushing a feather across her forehead. She whispers words into her ear, reminders that her body will heal and she will overcome the sickness that has taken root. She sprinkles crushed roots into the fire. It pops and flares, sending a sharp smell into the air, pungent enough to sting the eyes. The painting itself seems to pulse with life under the flickering firelight. The shapes shift subtly, not because the sand moves, but because the eye sees them differently with each breath. The healer continues rattling, chanting, and circling. The family joins, their voices earnest, the kind of singing that feels like a refusal and a desire to help their loved one. For a moment the young woman sways, her eyes half-lidded. A shiver runs down her arms, and her lips part. A cough bursts from her chest. She spits into a bowl set beside her, the liquid dark and foul-smelling. The healer nods sharply. To her, this is not just phlegm, it is the spirit's grip loosening. But the work is not over. The healer places cornmeal in the young woman's hands, instructing her to scatter it across the painting. Her movements are weak but steady, the pale dust falling into bright colors. The painting will not survive the night. It is meant to be temporary, a map drawn for spirits to guide healing into her body, and then the map is to be erased. When the ceremony is finished, the healer will sweep the sand away, carrying it outside to scatter in the wind. The young woman leans back, her face less tight and her breathing deeper. Her mother touches her hair gently, eyes wet but smiling. The healer sits back on her heels, sweat glistening on her forehead, her robe damp from the work. She knows the illness may return, but tonight it has been pushed away. As the sand is swept, the healer is thanked by the family with food, soft words, and a promise to remember the ritual. Outside, the stars prick the sky, cool and infinite. The young woman sleeps, her head on her mother's lap. The healer feels her own bones ache, and her hands cramp from the work, but her spirit is steady. The evening air cools quickly, with the chill that slides between the joints, and the people begin their preparations for a different kind of healing, a sweat lodge ceremony. The lodge itself waits just beyond the village, low to the ground, a dome of willow saplings bent and bound together, covered in hides and blankets until it looks like a small earth-bound hill. To anyone passing by, it might resemble nothing more than a curious mound. To those who step inside, it is a womb, a furnace, and a prayer house all at once. Men and women gather in small groups, speaking softly, their voices carrying like moth wings in the dusk. Stones are already being heated in a great fire outside the lodge, flames snapping greedily, the rocks glowing with a faint orange heartbeat. These stones are older than any person, drawn from the earth. When heated, they do not just radiate warmth, they carry memory. The healer walks slowly around the fire, sprinkling herbs onto the flame so that each burst of smoke smells different, sometimes sharp with cedar, sometimes sweet with sage, sometimes almost fruity when juniper berries are cast in. The smoke clings to hair and clothes, sinking deep into the fabric. The people breathe it in with reverence, even when it makes their eyes water. When the stones glow red, they are carefully carried with pitchfork-like poles and laid inside the lodge's central pit. The hiss of heat escaping is sharp. The participants step inside one by one, crouching low to fit through the small entrance. The air inside is dark, thick, and closed with the promise of heat. Blankets are dropped across the entrance, and suddenly the lodge becomes a sealed world, shut off from the stars and wind. At first it's quiet, so quiet that one can hear hearts beating and the rasp of breath. Then water is ladled onto the stones, and the hiss is immediate and violent, followed by a swell of steam so dense it feels like the air has gotten that much heavier. The heat clings to skin and pushes into lungs, pushing sweat down the temples. Some cough softly, some hum low to distract themselves, but all endure. The healer begins to sing, her voice thin but strong, and the steam seems to pulse with her rhythm. Others join in, and the chant seems to vibrate in the chest. The rattle shakes, feathers wave, and voices rise. The smell of cedar smoke still lingers, mixing now with the raw salt of human sweat. And in the lodge, the senses sharpen. The heat is overwhelming, but in it, clarity comes. People pray aloud, voices breaking as they name their hurts or illnesses, or whispering names of kin they hope to help. Some prayers are as short as a sigh, others stretch long and winding, like rivers finding their way back to sea. Tears mix with sweat, indistinguishable in the thick air. The healer ladles water again, steam rushing upward like a living thing, pressing everyone down. In this space, people are children again, enclosed and remade. A cough shakes into laughter, laughters into song, song into prayer, until the lodge feels more like a beating, pulsing heart filled with memories, feelings, and thoughts. When the door flap is lifted for a brief moment, the rush of cool night air slices through the steam. The contrast makes the body shiver, then ache for the heat again. The flap closes, darkness returns, and the cycle continues. Water on stones, the hiss of steam, and a chant. The body endures waves of discomfort until it feels cleansing. Time feels strange inside the lodge. A few minutes stretch into eternities. Eventually, the final ladle is hissing on the stones, the last chant fades, and the flap is lifted for the last time. People crawl out into the night on hands and knees, blinking at the stars as though they've never seen them before. The air feels impossibly cool, the ground is soft, and the sky is wide. Outside, bowls of cold water are ready, splashed across faces and poured down throats. The taste is sharp and more delicious than any feast. People laugh and stretch their limbs, coughing and clapping one another on their backs. The exhaustion is real, but it is clean and it feels like it's been rewarded with strength. Their bodies feel lighter. The healer sits by the fire again, her robe damp with sweat now, and her hands resting loosely in her lap. Someone hands her a bowl of broth, rich and savory, with some greasy marrow. She drinks deeply, savoring the flavors, letting it replace what was poured out of her. The lodge stands quietly behind them, its blankets sagging and the stones cooling in silence. Tomorrow it will be dismantled, remade, or left to rest. But tonight it has served its purpose. The night hums with insects, and the wind smells faintly of sage. The night continues onwards as cool sweat clings to the forearms of the people who stepped out of the sweat lodge. They gather in a wide clearing where the ground is tamped flat from years of feet pressing into it, a round place made so earth and sky can meet without anyone in between. The healer waits near the edge, robe drying in cedar-scented ripples, while dogs arrange themselves as sleepy sentries and yawn with theatrical sincerity. Someone brings out the stew pot, someone else a stack of wood, and for a few minutes the village hums like a kitchen that has decided to move outdoors. Drums come out of their bags, tight hides stretched over wooden frames, creaking like old door cords. The first beats test themselves, tap, tap, pause, then settle into a pulse that finds rib cages and requests tenancy as they rattle. Someone says the drum is the village's other heart. The joke is older than the drum, but it loosens the shoulders. A cedar flute slides in, breathy and low, like wind through the reeds, its notes threading the beat the way smoke threads between roof beams. The air tastes of juniper and dust. There are songs meant for everyone and songs that stay home behind careful lips. Tonight chooses the first kind. Voices step in without ceremony. Women high and clear, men low and steady, children a half beat late but determined to catch up. The healer does not count this as entertainment. Song and movement is its own form of medicine, after all. A line forms, then spirals, then opens like a flower. Grass rustles under moccasins, beads clack at wrist and ankle, fringes whisper like rain. Laughter erupts when an uncle misjudges a turn and nearly waltzes into the stew pot waiting on its tripod. The night replies with a skim of cool air that smells faintly of sagebrush. Eventually, the song turns to interpreting the stars and the constellations. Elders lift their chins and guide the eyes. They speak of the 7 sisters whose winter return promises long nights and longer stories. They trace the Big Dipper arcing towards the North Star like a ladle eternally seeking a home. Among the Dine, sky figures map the orderly making of the world, so people remember how to behave like a part of it. Among the Lakota, the stars are a nation that mirror the camps below. A person walking on the ground is, by design, walking among the lights. A boy asks if a drum can speak to the stars. His aunt says it can, but the stars are polite and let people speak first. The boy nods solemnly, then dances harder as if a compromise has been reached. Somewhere, a mosquito tries to make a theological point about shared blood, and is swatted into silence. The healer rises, not as leader, but as a hinge, and circles the outer rim of the dancers with a fan of feathers. From a small coal pan she draws smoke with slow sweeps, guiding it towards knees that ache and backs that complain. The fan makes a hush when it moves. With each pass, the dancer's shoulders drop, steps lengthen, and the circle settles into a smooth groove. A heavier thought loiters at the edge of the clearing. Night dances answer it without naming it. The drum tightens a notch, and singers choose a melody that climbs like a ladder and returns to the path. Feet answer automatically, and the body is reminded of its place in the group and how it should belong. A child falls briefly out of step, grins at the mistake, and is gently absorbed back into the current. Gestures appear that look like decoration to strangers and feel like instructions to those who know them. A palm lifted to the sky at the end of a verse, returning what you borrowed. A step crossing the body and uncrossing. A turn towards the east between songs, greeting the early tomorrow. None of this is exotic. It's all practiced sense for the people. The song then changes gait, and the drum rolls like hooves on packed ground, then settles into a heartbeat. Feathers flicker at shawl edges, eagle plumes stay where they belong. A singer's voice frays and is caught by another before it falls. Young men test an extra flourish so aunties will have material to talk about later. Between songs, an elder offers a short tale that winks at trickster without giving it the stage. A fox who learned to dance too well and discovered that applause, while flattering, does not cook the supper. Pride loosens and so do shoulders. A woman who has not laughed in weeks lets out a sound that startles her, then laughs again. The healer pauses at the stew pot to sip some broth, tasting of bone and onion. Food will take everyone back home after they're done being a part of the world, bowls traded and handed across doorways, reminding them they are a community. Healing likes to hitchhike on simple pleasures. A satisfied stomach leaves less room for stubborn thoughts or ill senses of the gut. Now the night has grown late enough to be called early, and the drum gives one last bang. Silence arrives, but it does not feel empty. People breathe it in and feel everything that has happened. Then hands meet hands, shakes and brief hugs, old jokes about knees that pretend to be older than they are. The old theatrical dogs stand and stretch into postures that would embarrass any person, and lead the way home as if they scheduled the whole evening. The healer lingers to cover the embers, pushing ash over the glow until red turns to a dignified black. On the far edge of a hearing, a coyote reviews the program with one amused yip. People begin drifting into their homes and falling into their blankets. And the healer smiles, knowing the practices passed down through her mother's line have served her community well.